My name is Ronald Cross, and I think many of you probably already know me from having me in class. But I just wanted to recommend to you that you stay tuned, because there's going to be more talks, whether it's tied in with the new freshman class or it's talks in the evening where I come or other professors or industry professionals come and give you talks about things that would be helpful to you in your career, whether it's academic or your professional career as you graduate. Also, I know that we're looking for opportunities to bring to you Mocha Night, where you can come and have coffee with the professors and engage with them and listen to them. There might be some things that you have on your mind that you really want to ask. You can ask those questions at those points, all in the form of something that's going to be helpful to you as a student, an engineering student here at the University of Texas at Arlington in our great CSE department. Come on by and join us.
What does a typical day in your profession look like?
Wow, Diego, that's a good question. What does a typical day look like? I'm not sure if you're in any type of STEM profession, there is a typical day. But I will say this, getting to work early, having a plan to execute for the day, know who you're engaging with, and then you begin work trying to knock down the barriers that have been presented to you in doing your job, your team and doing their job. Really, I mean, if you think about it, from a management leadership perspective, it's not about directing and telling people, you do this, you do that, you do this. It is about empowering them and knocking down the barriers for them to do their job. So you always go into a day knowing what is going to happen in terms of deliverables to your immediate internal customers and into the customers external to the company, and what you need to do to ensure that we're marching to the plan. And it's also all about metrics, having at your fingertips a management information system that tells you what the status is. Then as you meet with your teams, you get to do one thing that's so very important. This is again from a leadership management perspective, and that is to ask why 3 times. Now, one may ask, why would anybody in a managerial position ask why 3 times? It's all about getting status from the team. So the team provides you a status about project X, and you'll say, oh, we're either on schedule or we're off schedule. If we're off schedule, well, why are we off schedule? Because we didn't get this deliverable from our internal suppliers. Well, why weren't they able to supply you with what you need to do the job? Well, they weren't able to because they didn't get the tool they needed. Well, why did they not get the tool they needed? So in terms of asking why 3 times, it's not that you're trying to interrogate your team. It's trying to understand what the root cause is rather than what the bandage is. So as far as what a typical day is like, it's about identifying what needs to be done, who's involved, what is needed to make things happen, and are you properly empowering the team? What would I do differently if I had it to do again as a student? This is something I would recommend to undergraduates and even to master level students. It's kind of interesting to think about this. I would recommend, if you haven't taken any classes in economics or engineering economy, you do so, because I didn't. And it wasn't so much me going to work for a company and not being being concerned about what I didn't know. It was not being able to know what I didn't know, right? Because you can know things that you don't know and you go and research them and find out, but the things that you're unaware of can kind of guide you in the wrong avenues. So knowing a little bit of why businesses are stood up and how the economics of it drives a business in terms of trying to make a profit. It's all about economies, and it's all about adding value. So as an employee, if I had fully understood why that engine of a corporation is stood up to make profit, where did the profit go, for what purpose did it go, I would have a better understanding of my role into that company, not just as an employee, but as a vested, interested party that is there to support the end goals. So I would probably take an undergraduate class in economics or engineering economy. Now, having said that, in the master courses I took, I probably took 5 classes in economics, and I overachieved from that perspective and learning more and more about it. I even went and got my license as an investment banker or stockbroker, because I wanted to understand how an idea could be translated into something that has commercial value, and you unfold around that idea a company, an ongoing concern that is able to hire people, create a product or service, and sell it to the customer base on an ongoing basis. So perhaps what I would do differently is, as an undergraduate, rather than waiting to master level type courses, is to take more courses in economics, not just the sciences, because you have to find your way and understand how you fit into this bigger puzzle of corporate America. What is it that I dislike most about my current job, and what do I like most about it? Okay. Obviously, you know, I had 38 years in industry and working in the aerospace and electronics industry. And it's very regimented around the business model and what it is we're trying to do for our customers. So now I took an early retirement to give back, because I really enjoy the interactions with the students. And I look at the students, our students here at UTA are our future. And if we do a good job, the future's going to be more or less guaranteed. I mean, there's happenstance, things happen. So having said all that, perhaps the thing that I don't like about this job the most is what I don't know that I should know, because I'm always discovering things. Had I known earlier, I probably could have done a better job in my previous time here. And I've been here at the university for 4 years now. So it's not perhaps having a formal mentoring, onboarding type of function, if you will. Here's the 5 things you really need to know that we as UTA in the College of Engineering and the CSE department think would be of importance to you or of value to you. Now, that is not to say that I have not reached out and people have willingly come and helped me and advised me. Some of the finest people I know that I've ever worked with work in this department and other departments at UTA. But if I don't know what the right question is to ask, what I don't know, they're not going to be able to help me. Okay, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. Now, what do I like most about it? The people. I like my colleagues, the professors, the administration, the dean's office, all been superbly helpful, and the students. Do you know that professors and instructors probably learn as much from the students as they do the students learn from them? It's because we view the world based on the sum total of who we are, what we've seen, smelt, tasted, felt, engaged with, thought, hoped, and dreamed for. And our students bring a different set of those experiences to the classroom, and they say things that are kind of marvelous. Wow, I never thought about it. So you end up growing from those experiences and learning. You're able to look at the world maybe a little bit different. It's not a gumption trap. You know what a gumption trap is, don't you, Diego? A gumption trap is looking at no matter what the problem is before you in the same way over and over and over again. It's kind of like walking up and down a well-worn pathway. And if that over the centuries keeps being done, pretty soon walls rise on either side of the pathway and you can't look left or right. All you see is just what's ahead. That's a gumption trap. You're not able to rise above the framework of understanding that's previously been laid and look left and look right and see other possibilities. So the environment with the students and the multiculturalism and the diversity we have here at the university, to me, is superb. I learn a lot from my students. Do I have any favorite industry stories? I have gaggles and gaggles of them, right? I mean, I have a lot of them. But I always try to leverage them in a way that's a positive for the students to learn. I have stories going back to the late 70s, early 80s, all the way forward in my career. But the things that perhaps I use the most is things that are tied into some of my favorite sayings. I'll give you an example. I worked with one of my first mentors in the industry. And, you know, if Glenn Short were to see this video, Glenn, I know it's been years and years and years, decades since I've last seen you, but thank you so much for taking an interest in me early in my career in 1980, 81. But his wife one day called and she said, Glenn, is Glenn around? And I said, no, Glenn's in a meeting. She goes, well, just let him know that I called. I'd like to chat with him. I said, okay, he should be out shortly. She called back 20 minutes later, and I said, no, Glenn's still in that same meeting. I'm sorry. She goes, well, just let him know I called. I understand. So maybe 40 to 50 minutes later, she called. Now, it's been over an hour through these calls. And I said, no, I'm afraid to tell you that Glenn is still in the meeting. And then she responded. I've got it on my favorite quotes list. She said, well, don't they know that the brain cannot absorb what the seat cannot endure? And that, for whatever reason, stuck with me. It was so profound to me that when I had the ability to shape policy in engineering organizations, I said, we will never hold a peer review that goes beyond 2 hours. Up until I got into the position, there were peer reviews going 3 and 4 and 5 hours, which was crazy because people lose focus. They're not at their best. I put into the policy that said, if you need to go 2 hours, that's going to be okay. But if you reach that 2 hour and you haven't finished it, you adjourn for the day and you reschedule and pick up the next day. So that's one of those stories that really had some life lessons that helped me as I approached managing and working with people. You don't want to talk to them ad nauseum to the point that they lose focus, because it's all about adding value to the company. And if you lose focus and you don't add value, then you're doing what? You're adding negative value, meaning you're taking away from the value that presently exists in the company.
What strategies did you use to be successful in college?
That's an interesting question. What strategies did I use to be successful in college? I'll answer that by way of another story. I don't know if you've seen the movie Outlaw Josie Wells, but it's a Western starring Clint Eastwood. And throughout the movie, you know, people kind of cling on to him, and they'll say, well, I thought you were dead. And he goes, no, I'm not dead yet. But he starts out alone, and before long, he has this group of people that's following him around. And he meets this one Cherokee who was a leader of a tribe. And the Cherokee was now separated, but he kind of hung around the Outlaw Josie Wells and went wherever he went. And so one evening they were just sitting and talking, and he said, you know, I went to Washington, D.C. And Outlaw Josie Wells says, well, why'd you go there? He goes, I spoke to the great chief, meaning the president. He said, you did? Well, what did he say to you? And here's the quote. He said, he told me to endeavor to persevere. Now let's cut out of the scene, right? That was one of those sayings that, again, it kind of stuck with me. What does it mean to endeavor to persevere? I mean, it seems like just nonsense, doesn't it? But no, what I figured it meant might not meant what the writer wanted it to mean, but what it meant to me was work hard at working hard. So everything that I do, even in my college days, I worked hard at working hard to achieve the goals that I had set before me. I got married early. I was 20 years old when I got married. So I was a sophomore in college. So I not only had to continue my education and of course get through the difficulties of all that presented, but I had to take care of the things in my personal life to make sure that the family was well and everything. And I always went back to have a goal, set a goal, work hard at working hard and doing what's necessary and sufficient to achieve the goal. And really, that's good advice to anybody.
Why did you choose this profession?
That's a real good question. Why did I choose this profession / field? JFK, John F. Kennedy. Now remember, I'm a child of the 60s, pretty much. You know, I went into junior high in the school in the 60s and went into high school in the early to mid 70s and in college from mid 70s to the late 70s. JFK put a challenge before the nation by the end of the decade to place men on the surface of the moon. So the space program was front and center as I grew up. And I knew, because I was always taking things apart much to the dismay of my parents and putting things back together. I always was curious about science and technology and mathematics. And that quote inspired me. And then to see the space program, the moon landing programs, unfold before me and witness it as it was history being made as we launched and circled the moon and came back safely. And then we launched, circled the moon, and landed on the moon and came back safely. Not once, but many times. That seeded in me an intense desire to work in a science field. At first, I wanted to be an astronaut. Of course, every kid at that time wanted to be an astronaut. But I realized that I could add more value by being an engineer or a scientist. And so everything that I did from junior high school through high school, I took all the hard classes, took all the math classes. I clipped out of classes in college my freshman year. I focused on science. And my undergraduate's in engineering physics. And believe me, that was like a double major in physics and in electrical engineering. And if I didn't turn gray at that time, I was almost gray. But it was something hard to achieve to prepare me to do what I most desired to do, that of becoming an engineer. That was seeded back when I was preteen, teenager. So I would say it was the challenge presented by the moon missions. And now, you think about it, Elon Musk and others around him, even Stephen Hawking and others, have talked about the imperative for humanity to become a multiplanetary species to ensure the survival of the species. Now, I'm not saying doom is happening tomorrow, but it just makes sense because of our innate curiosity that we should strive to do the greater thing. And that is to become that multiplanetary species, starting with either the moon or Mars. Now, I know the moon's not a planet, but it makes sense to go to the moon and establish a permanent base and then go to Mars. But many people are desiring to go directly to Mars and set up scientific bases and eventually begin to populate it. That is not a simple matter, and it is intensely intertangled with the advancement in science and technology, because a lot of the technology to get us there safely and back exists, but the technology to get us there on a permanent basis, perhaps we need to do more, because the technology doesn't totally exist that we can have people live on Mars in a sustained way.
Have you ever read the book We Are Bob?
I have not. I know nothing about the book.
You've never heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It talks a lot about traveling to other planets, the human race, finally venturing off, and what AI could mean and whatnot. It's totally science fiction.
Yes.
And some kind of deem it as like the epitome of like that Space Trek theme, but in a book.
Yes.
It's got its flaws, but I think you would like that book.
Yeah.
I've read the whole series.
Well, since you're speaking about books, in the 60s and early 70s, I read a lot of Isaac Asimov's works, I, Robot, the Trilogy, Foundation, things like that. And what really amazed me was that there was this one character, he carried around a shoebox, and inside that shoebox was really a computer. And that just blew my mind, because you got to realize this. At that time, computers took up the entire floor, several floors of buildings. As a matter of fact, my senior year in high school, we were kind of nominated for engineers for a week. And a sales engineer came in from IBM, picked me up at school, took me around to all the bank installations that had leased IBM computers. And their computers were huge. The RAID platters to store data were huge. I mean, it was just amazing to think, which was science fiction at that time, that you could get a computer in a shoebox. And now we carry them around in our pocket every day. What once was science fiction is a reality today. And I tell my students, I say, you're the future. There's a poem called Ode by Arthur O'Shaughnessy, and it talks about the movers and shakers of the world forever it seems. And I say, look, reality is I'm at the end of my career, and I'm trying to give back because I want you to have what was given to me. But you are the next movers and shakers. The things that are science fiction today, you will make a reality tomorrow. And if that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what else will. Let me tell you something that I found out from my first year at Martin Marietta. That was a predecessor company to Lockheed Martin. I was given a task that seemed almost impossible. But what I realized was that I was more capable than I thought I was. And it wasn't because I realized it on my own. I had lots of mentors that I could talk to. And I realized that there's different ways of looking at things that would allow me to achieve things and results I never thought I could achieve. So don't short sell yourself. Just remember, effort precedes results, and you'll always get there. How would a student who's going from freshman to senior year, what do they need to do to make them valuable to a company? First off, you need to lay that good foundation. There's nothing that short circuits or shortcuts the building a good fundamental foundation in sciences and math. Science and math, especially mathematics, is the language of engineers and scientists. If you do not build a good foundation, you will not be all you're capable of being. And there's a lot of people out there in society that are more capable than they presently are showing. So you have to recognize that you've got to build a foundation of capabilities centered around science and mathematics. The other thing, which is perhaps something that up until only recently, we'll say in the last 3 to 4 years, team building. Team building, working with people, is so very, very important in terms of achieving. My first job out of school was working for Lockheed Electronics. And the gentleman told me that was my supervisor. He said, we have this one guy, he's so brilliant, all you do is stuff paperwork under his door and he stuffs the answer right out from the other side. But that's no longer possible. You cannot work as an individual contributor. You have to work with teams. And you know why that is? You know why teams are so very important? Teams are so very important because of bounded rationality. Bounded rationality says Ron only knows what Ron knows. And any solution that I come with is only going to be as good as I'm capable of producing on my own. But Ron and Diego, we're a lot smarter than Ron. So any solution we come up with is going to be a better solution. Companies know this. They require people to work in teams. What does it take to work in teams? It takes the soft skills, collaboration, negotiation, and providing it in a framework of dignity and respect. You may not agree with somebody, but you listen to them, and then they will listen to you. You cannot go off the deep end and deal with emotion. You have to deal with people in terms of dignity and respect so that you can leverage that expanded rationality of the team to accomplish the great things that you'll accomplish as a team.
So let's say a freshman goes into college, they go through their sophomore, they go through their junior, and now they're at their senior year and they're applying for it and they're interviewing for companies. They go into an interview and they say, I'm good in teams. And the interviewer's like, okay, how can you prove that? So how could a student in their experiences prove that they're good?
That's a very good, you make a very good point. How can an individual prove to a company that they're good at working in teams? And you have to deal with results. So you can't fabricate something. You cannot fabricate, that's untruthful. And oh, by the way, that would be grounds if found to be you lied on your interview or in the application, you would be terminated because companies just don't deal with that. There's an ethics and a standard at which they proceed. But having said all that, how do you prove it? My senior design project, we had a team of 4 people. We were given this task to do this type of job, and we excelled at it as shown by the grade we received or the publicity we received, by the demonstrations that we were able to do in front of industry representatives, by the IP patents that we got, intellectual property in the form of patents that we received based on what we did. You can show that you were able to collaborate and negotiate and manage with your teammates to achieve a certain result. You always want to present kind of like a case study. You want to present something factual where it shows that you were able to work in teams. I like to ask, okay, what was your greatest success in working with teams? The interviewee will tell me. And then I'll say, what was your greatest failure? I always like to turn those sorts of questions into strengths. What's my greatest failure in working with teams? To be honest, I'm a little bit intolerant of people that don't take their job seriously. Well, how did you overcome it? I approached the individuals and I talked to them about how they approached their own job and what effect it was having on the team. I tried to show them through some engagement of how they were affecting the team and the negativity that was being injected. And generally speaking, when I did that and have a casual, non-threatening conversation with them, they pretty much agreed with me, right? So when I say my greatest weakness or failure is around intolerance, it's not about being intolerant to the point that I'm adding negative value. It's about getting people to do what is required of them as a part of a team to achieve greatness. How did you learn your new job without going through some formal mentoring or training program? And generally, I will tell you, if there's a weakness in corporate America, and we're talking about somebody that's already an employee of a company, you may work on this program and then you get transferred to another program with a different group of people, different group of management, and so forth. So how do you learn that new job? Part of your success as a engineer, technologist, scientist, systems engineer, architect, whatever the case may be, software engineer, how you become successful is know what is required of you in terms of the three baselines: your cost baseline, your technical baseline, and your schedule baseline. Your technical baseline are the requirements. What must you achieve in the form of deliverables? And really, when you start thinking about this, you understand that you're compelled to interrelate with other people. You're compelled to build a network of support, because any one person is not all capable and all knowing. It's all about people. So you cannot know everything about the job. You are dependent upon specialists, people that know some subjects and topics to the atomic level. And for you to be able to say, I know all that, would say you know things superficially and you don't know anything, right? So you build a frame or a network of support by learning who the subject matter experts are and engaging with them and building a relationship with them. And generally that's done by working on projects with these individuals, and then after you go on to a new job, you retain a working or a relationship with them by touching base with them periodically. Sometimes a question comes my way and I say, that's a good question. I don't know. Let's call John, right? And we'll call John on the phone and John will give me some information. I'll say, yeah, here's what John says. He's absolutely right. This guy's amazing, right? So you don't have to know everything, but you have to know enough to know who to call at times, because that's where you leverage your team, you leverage your employees, you leverage the subject matter experts who work in the company and external to the company. Now you got to be careful. If you leverage subject matter experts outside the company, you don't want to be talking to them about company business unless there's a formal arrangement between them, a non-disclosure agreement. But having said that, you achieve success in your job by leveraging what other people know. You have to know, but you can't know everything, so you know who to go to when it's outside the bounds of your experience or your knowledge base.
Describe your teaching philosophy.
My students describe my teaching philosophy, and my students know I ask a lot of questions. And sometimes when I ask questions, I don't get a response. So then I begin to ask questions directly of particular students. And the reason why I do that is to get them engaged and involved. There's that old adage, and it might be actually I don't know where it comes from, but it comes from some other source than just Ronald Cross. It says, tell me and I'll forget, show me and I'll remember, but involve me and I'll understand. That's what's important. Involving the student in the conversation, involving the student in the lecture, talking to them in terms of how it's going to be meaningful to them and their job. I mean, if you're talking about something that's very theoretical and there's no direct line to how that's going to help them in their job, you've got to make it real for them. I actually had a student say, all this research is going on at this university. How is it really going to be used? And I said, it's new knowledge. Before there's new technology, there's new knowledge, new understanding. You take that new knowledge and that new understanding and apply it to the real world, it becomes technology that is useful to people in the form of products and services. So you engage them, but you lead them in the conversation and let them discover for themselves. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I feel too. Like, I have a hard time, to be honest, focusing in class. I don't know why. Well, this past year I've been working on it a lot. But in high school I had a hard time listening. Right? Mm-hmm. I would always have to have a visual. So when the teacher's teaching, I would look at the PowerPoint instead of the teacher. Mm-hmm. Because if I just try to listen, I kind of zone out and I start daydreaming. But I've been getting into audiobooks. I've been like listening to podcasts, and so I've been really training how to listen so I can engage better with the teacher. Right.
Engagement is so very, very important. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's like you're a partner in the conversation. You're a partner in the education. It's not the professor-student relationship that's important. It's the partner's engagement with one another that's important. How is UTA different from the colleges and universities that I went to? I went to the University of Arkansas, the Florida Institute of Technology, Liberty University in Newburgh. So how is it different from the other hard sciences type universities I went to? We're in a different age. I mean, when I was in college, I started using slide rules, and I ended up using calculators. Now, if that doesn't speak to the age in which I grew up in versus the age in which you grew up in, the age of computers, where as a small child you're already using computers, right? So at that time when I was in at the university in my undergraduate, to go research something took a lot of legwork. You had to go to the research libraries. You had to go find the appropriate journal or book or publication. It wasn't instantly available at your fingertips. So in order to achieve something, it took a lot of I shouldn't say that. It took a lot of legwork that required significant amounts of time. Today, knowing the right portals with the right access, you can lay your hands on most any type of information that's tied into your research that you're doing. Because we have a fantastic research library over here. They have portals to other libraries. If they don't have it, you have an avenue in which to go get it. So I think the biggest difference is the immediacy of the tools and the data. Technology has progressed so far from the time that I was in school versus the time that you're in school.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, even just this 10-year difference these past 10 years.
You think about Moore's Law over 30 or 40 years. Moore's Law, the processing speed doubles every 18 to 24 months. The ability to execute numbers of machine instructions per second increases, doubles every 24 months. I mean, what a computer is able to do is amazing now versus what it did at that time. I had actually had an individual that I worked with, and we were designing microprocessor boards, literally designing microprocessor boards and memory boards. And we were designing computer boards with 4-bit processors and 8-bit processors. Intel 8080, the 6800 microprocessor from Motorola. They announced, we're coming out with a 68000, 16-bit addressing, 16-bit processor. Holy mackerel, it's much more capable than this 8-bit processor. I had an individual tell me that I worked with, I don't understand why we need all this computational power. In one sense, he was being very short-sighted because he was only looking at what we needed to do with our output for developing these boards. He wasn't thinking about what other people could come up with. You look at all the apps, again, right here. You can find an app to do just about everything, and it's because of the processing power of the computer in this phone. This convergence of technology of video recording, sound recording, computers and applications and cell phones right here at your fingertips. So significant difference in levels of technology that are productivity gains that you're able to use and leverage in your education that I didn't have access to because they didn't exist. So I'm amazed. The other thing I have to, as kind of not part of the original question, but as an add-on, and it's really complementary to the UTA engineering students here. When I first came here to teach as an adjunct classes, I was astounded at the students' ability to retain information. The idea that they could grasp certain concepts so quickly. And I don't know if it was a result of them having access of computers early on where I didn't, versus maybe they just had learned differently now. It's a different time, different age. I don't know what it is, but I've been constantly amazed at a student, the average student's ability to grasp and hold data and information. Just realize, I think it would be a safe statement to say that there's more scientists and engineers alive today than has ever lived before. And you think about all that brain power. There's one quote you probably remember from class: knowledge is power. So the more you know and understand, the more power you have to affect change, to affect some result that you desire. And it can be useful, and it can also work against you. So you have to be very, very careful. Knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm. Funny that you said that, because this isn't a question, but like, I'm actually taking a business minor because I acknowledge that, like, even though my priority as an engineer is to create a product, create inventions, innovate, there's no point to my innovations if someone doesn't want to buy them.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really fundamental statement. If you find something interesting and you spend a lot of your time and effort in trying to bring to the market a product or service, but you haven't tested it for desirability, you could be creating something with all that vested time, energy, and money that nobody's going to want to buy. So what's the purpose? As a matter of fact, what I tell my employees, and I've told them in the past, is we will not do something that's your hobby. We will do something that adds value to the corporation. And how you add value to the corporation is eventually producing something that is sellable to your market space, to your customers. If nobody wants to buy it, that's a company on its way out of business.
Yeah, it's a real shame too. Because I mean, not everything is profitable, and some things are like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some things may be highly interesting. And from just the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, that has its place. Don't get me wrong. We want to understand the universe around us. We want to understand the machinations that go on and do this basic research just for the value of adding to the knowledge base. However, from a corporate standpoint, we do research and development to produce new technologies that we can translate into new products and services that can be sold into the market space and then allow us to earn a profit. We take part of that profit, reinvest it in research and development, and do it again and again and again. That's a reason why, and I go back to this phrase I said earlier, companies are not just corporations, they're called ongoing concerns. The reason for the expression is if you're not concerned about it, you're going out of business. So you always have to pay attention to the business. You talked to me earlier about my teaching style.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I really have a style. I just use what I've been able to experience and bring to the classroom. And of course the lectures that are provided for the textbook. But if you don't show a passion for what it is you're doing, students may look at something as a job rather than a profession. And there's a difference. A job is something you do today and you don't do tomorrow. But a profession is something that stays with you for a lifetime. So when you look at that, you have to have a passion for what you do. If you love what you do, it's not a job, it's a pleasure.
That's good.
And by the way, that's not a quote from me. That's a quote from one of my previous managers.
Who was this manager? Where did you have this job?
It's kind of interesting. Mr. Hawthorne, who was a manager of a grocery store. And as a 16-year-old, I went to work for him. And he was training me what I needed to know to do the job. And I actually kept that job through part of my college career, right? But he came up to me one day and he said, Ron, he said, you know, if you enjoy your job, it's not a job, it's a pleasure. And what he meant was you really have to have a passion about what it is you're doing, because if you're not thrilled about what you're doing, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's going to become mundane, and you're not going to be focused, and you're not going to be interested in making sure everything's taken care of. You have to have a passion, especially if you're going to work in the field of technology. If you're doing it for the money, go look for another job, because it's not about the money. Money's going to be good, but it's not about the money. It's about having a passion, an interest in technology and how it works and what it can do for you or for somebody else. So if you love your job, it's not a job, it's a pleasure. You have to have a passion about it to be good at it. I mean, that's kind of one of those self-evident truths. You know, I've been married for over 40 years. Bless my wife's heart for being patient with me for all those years. But even on the weekend, I'm doing something. I'm working on a project at the house or doing something up in my office at home. And she'd say, why don't you just sit down and relax? And I say, I am relaxing. This is what I do to relax. You know, it's almost a foreign concept, because she thinks about, you know, being more in a relaxed state of mind. I get relaxed by being busy and by doing something and by uncovering something that is meaningful to me, or getting some result that is meaningful to the family or to the job. I think we have a distraction at the door.
Hello.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to say a few words about Francis Bacon. I mean, he was a scientist, theologian, philosopher from the late 1500s, early 1600s, but more specifically, he did a lot of writing. And one particular quote that I use in class, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, and I didn't do a really good job of explaining it, but he made the statement that knowledge is power. And really what that means is that the more we're aware of the natural world, the more that we're aware of our physical surroundings, the more that we're aware and know the people around us, the more capable we're going to be to navigate the pitfalls that are set out there just by the happenstance of the world. And so, especially in this day and age, you know, you think about the internet and the risk and all that goes along with it. You protect your personal information, because if you don't protect your personal information, then other people can get your information and become you. And if they become you, they can perpetrate fraud against you by filing, we'll say, a false tax return. Guess who the IRS is going to come to? They're not going to go to the guy that perpetrated fraud. They don't know. They're going to come to you. So knowledge is power. It can work for you and it can work against you if you're careless. And I was astounded a couple of years ago during a summer class. I had a student say this. He said, well, I don't really care what people know about me. And I said, great, give me your credit card and your driver's license. But I didn't really want them, but I wanted to make a point. You can put yourself at risk by handling your personal information very carelessly. You would give somebody else knowledge about you that would give them power over you. So it's not about it's not just about attaining more scientific knowledge, more math-based knowledge, more knowledge about the university, about the business you're going to work in. It's more about protecting your information so that you don't allow other people to have power over you or power over your company, because it is all about competition in the market space. And that's the reason why companies have confidential information and their intellectual property is protected so that other people cannot gain access to it.
Do you have any ghost stories?
Ghost stories, wow. I don't really have any, but in college I was working as an intern for a company that had built this huge. It was tied into renewable energy, and they took things from a paper mill. I shouldn't say things. They took the byproducts from a paper mill and lumber company, and they used it as fuel to turn water into steam, to turn turbines to generate electricity. And so it provided energy back to the company and to the community local there. So as it was starting up, they had to take a lot of data and monitor it 24/7. So as part of my intern position, I had the night shift. I had to work from, it was like 11 to 7 in the morning. And periodically, like every 15 minutes, I had to walk around the entire facilities, which was quite huge, and read dials and take measurements. And to tell you, in the dead of night, with nobody else around, with darkness and little pockets of light and steam being forming around, it was like a movie, a nightmare in a movie, right? But actually nothing ever really happened. It was just me letting my imagination run far and wide. But I did what was sufficient and necessary because I knew it was required. And perhaps that's the message to any student. You're going to be asked to do some things you're not comfortable with. You have to persevere, stay focused, and overcome your inhibitions to make it happen.